Good afternoon, all. I'm going to be joined today with Jane Knight from the Zita West Clinic, who is a counsellor. And I have worked with Jane for the last 20 years, and she helps so many of our clients that are planning on IVF. She does implications counseling, and she's absolutely amazing. So I've got lots of questions for her today, and I'm just waiting for her to join me very, very soon. Here goes. She'll be on any minute. Connecting.
Oh, I've got to turn that around.
That's better. Jane, how are you?
Zita!
I haven't seen you for about 7 months, have I?
It feels like forever.
I know.
And all I can say is I'm really pleased that you're dressed. I'm assuming you're dressed. I can only see your head.
Oh,
but
I
when
might
I
not be. You don't know what I've got on, Jane.
When I had a practice yesterday, I ended up in a room with lots of naked women trying to get things into the oven. So
I better not ask any more, had I?
don't
I
ask
was just
anymore.
saying that we've been working together for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And I've been a counsellor for that long, but also you did a lot, didn't you, around fertility awareness, and you've written books and all sorts of things. But it's great to have you on to talk about counselling, because one of the things that I think a lot of clinics struggle with, even though counselling is a free part of the service, a lot of women don't want to access it, do they? They feel that they don't know what good it's going to do them. So if you could explain your work and what you do, that would be brilliant. And then I've got a load of questions.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think counselling often has a pretty negative sort of feel to it, is the first thing. And there's kind of a feeling that you go to counselling if you've got major problems and you've kind of hit rock bottom, and that's the only way to try to sort of sort things through. So there's a sense of, if you need.
Yeah.
This is why it's almost in the fertility arena, it's important that we kind of, it would be wonderful to give it another name that's not counselling, but basically it is about creating a space where you can start to just give yourself a bit of headspace to look at how you're viewing the whole thing, what this is doing to you as a person, what it's doing to you and your relationship, if you're in a relationship, and so on. And just to be able to have a bit of a step back. So in terms of, as and when you might access it, it really doesn't matter. It's about, let's try and get a bit of brain space here. Let's try and just see if I can spend a bit of time just stopping and being able to consider with someone that's quite independent. Obviously, all counselling sessions will be completely confidential. There would be very few times when I would need to break confidence, and that would only be, for example, if you were to just disclose that you just, robbed a bank or something like that. So that there's specific times, or if you're a danger to yourself or to someone else. But apart from that, what goes on between those four walls, or obviously more of it now is online, stays completely confidential in any other sort of form of support counselling.
And so you see women, but you also see couples. Is it more common for you to see a woman on her own or a couple?
It's varied, really. I think it often starts out just with a woman on her own, but very often she'll say, I think it'd be really helpful for my husband to talk to you. And often It's like, well, I've met, or my partner, I don't know how I'll get him to see you. Men are always fascinating, because I think often there's that sense of, they don't need to talk, they don't do talking, they've never learnt to sort of that expressing emotions. So I think it's a different approach with men. Often you have the first 10-15 minutes where they need to sort of talk and download about work and things like that, and then suddenly they can slip into that more vulnerable part of themselves, if you like. And often that's about, how do I cope with my partner? How do I help her when there's nothing I can do? And if it's a male fertility problem, added the layer of guilt that she is the one that's going through the investigations, the treatment for something that's my problem. There's something that's.
And I feel sorry for men with this, because a lot of the focus is on the woman, and I think it's very, very hard, especially when a man gets a poor result. Like a woman, and I've often said this, with her ovary result, her AMH result, it comes back as a number. But for a poor man, it will come back with abnormal heads and strange shaped tails and low numbers, and they're made to feel a bit freakish. And their main concern is they can't they don't know how to express it, but also they're worried that if their morphology is really poor, there's lots of unanswered questions. Is my baby going to be abnormal? And all of this, isn't there?
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And I think certainly in circumstances, for example, where someone might be just sent their results and they're looking to see what the normal is and then what their figures are. And certainly some of the terminology that's used, like the abnormal morphology,
Yeah.
that immediately gives you a sense that every, child that you might have is going to be abnormal. Of course, it couldn't be further from the truth. So I think even once that's explained, so once a man really understands, there's always that sense of, well, is it something I've done? Maybe, and it may be related to something from the past, an infection. It may be more often it's related to something like an undescended testis as a child, but it can be lifestyle factors. And I think again, that brings in this other whole area of how much do you have to completely change your life? Do you have to completely stop smoking? Do you have to completely stop drinking? What is appropriate in this circumstance when, a man's sense would be, well, my mate down the pub, he's just got his girlfriend pregnant, and, there was none of this. You can't drink, you can't smoke. But that brings in another whole layer, I think, when there's a sense of trying to improve, for example, sperm health and so on, because there's a sort of almost a having to police, or a sense of wanting to police him and his lifestyle as well as your own. So it's a complicated one.
Yeah, it's funny though. Sometimes when couples come in, the man will come in with his arms folded, won't he? Not wanting to really be there. But then when when as a couple they realise that this is a safe space, because sometimes it's very hard, Jane, isn't it, to constantly have these conversations around fertility without it evolving into a row or an argument. And when you've got somebody else there that's holding that space, it makes a big difference to opening up, doesn't it?
I think it does. I think you're right. I think that sort of real resistance to the process, but also that sense of, there is often that feeling of he's been sort of towed along and sort of pushed through the door, and often I find that men and women are often sitting on the good old days when we had the lovely leather sofa. They would be sitting on opposite ends of the sofa, and you realised all communication had gone because there was only one purpose, and that was, we've got to make a baby and we've got to make it tonight and tomorrow night, but not the next night, and so on. So there's this enormous tension in the relationship. So I think a big part, for example, of the counselling is to try and diffuse the whole situation, to try and not make this the only thing that matters, to try and look at the longer stage of it as well, and to look at what else is going on in the relationship, because relationships suffer because of this. It's the most horrendous thing that anyone could want to go through, when it seems that every man and his dog is having babies at this stage, and you're just not able to do this thing that it feels as if you were put on the planet to do. And I think that's for both men and women, that sense of, this should be such a simple thing. I can achieve at this, and got top positions in all sorts of areas.
But I think as well, Jane, what's difficult is that when you throw into the mix everything else that's going on for that woman or that couple, not so much now with the pandemic, but before, flying all over the world, building a house, doing an extension, living with in-laws, having stepkids, and then IVF in the midst of all of it, trying to nip out for appointments. It's tough, isn't it? But do you see, in all the years you've been doing this, are there common themes that women and couples will come with? Is there a thread that goes through this? I know that everybody's an individual.
I think the real thread going through it is, there's been this increasing complete 110% focus on this, we've got to make a baby and we've got to make it now. And obviously into that mix so often is this enormous fear. There's like this express train heading towards them called age, and so there's this real fear of the 40 or the 41, 42 and so on. So this terror and this urgency and this sense of needing to have some kind of control on it, and therefore to work harder, to put in, I think, to really use all the skills that you've ever learned since you were a kid,
Yeah.
as to how to make things happen, how to, what more do I need to do to make this happen. And one of the biggest problems, I think, sometimes is because it becomes the be all and end all, it's right up there on a pedestal, that it's almost as if there's a fear about it. If it doesn't happen, it's the end of the world. It's maybe the end of the relationship. I shall be on my own and all the rest of it. So we end up with this sort of spiral, what often called catastrophic thinking.
Yeah.
You end up at that stage. And it is a very lonely place. It's an isolated place when you feel stuck in something that friends around are just getting on and doing, seemingly effortless. And I think the big thing with this, and the number of times I say that, is look, life is unfair. It is tough, because what we've learned as we've gone through life is things generally, we work better when things seem quite fair.
Yeah.
Right from when, when our birth order determines as to what time we go to bed and so on, or whatever. There's that sense of things being fair and fairly distributed. If you want to buy a car, they don't sort of say, well, you might not get one. Give us 10 grand, 20 grand, but you might not get lucky. Yeah, no, there's no certainty.
Yeah, there's no certainty, and that's what's really difficult. Rubbish. And I think as well, it conflates everything else that's going on in your life, and it's a grind, isn't it? You just carry on with this. It grinds you down. That's what I'm trying to say. It really does grind you down.
I think it strips you of everything, Zita. It absolutely strips you bare of your confidence, your sense of self, sense of yourself as a woman, as everything else, and your abilities to perform. I mean, it's almost like in other areas you might actually be achieving well at work, achieving super well, but you certainly don't feel as if you are. Even if you're getting promotions, there's that sense of it's not really the thing I want to be doing anyway, and it never feels, it feels hollow.
So how do you work with a woman or a couple then to shift their mindset or their way of thinking? Do you give them exercises? Do you see them weekly? How does it usually work?
I think it's very varied. Quite honestly, Zita, I don't work in a way, in some forms of counselling or therapy, there's a sense of you go in with a problem. It may be something from the past or something else, some kind of abuse or something that was going on in the family, and you were almost set with a lot of sessions, weekly sessions, twice weekly sessions for an indefinite period. Then there's a wind down time. This is a very different, fertility and counselling support is very different. This is about, okay, where are we now? Now, sometimes there are things from the past, but actually this is not the time to go back and spend time trying to make that different. We have to, yes, we acknowledge it. Yes, we spend time just saying, okay, I get it. I see what's gone on. I see that there's been a catalogue, whether it's relationships that have not been successful, whether it's pregnancies that have had to be terminated, or let's understand where you are, where you're coming from. Okay?
And also, Jane, as well, if people have, everybody's got baggage from the past, but you can be over therapized as well, can't you? You can just keep talking and talking when you just need,
you have to say, okay, happen. That was it. We acknowledge that was really hard, but let's put it to one side, because actually, because of some of that you've been through, you have a huge amount now of life experience. This is something you're passing on to your family. So we take you from where you are, okay, warts and all, if you like, okay, and we now say, okay, now what we want to really start to do is look at how you react to these things. So in other words, if you're looking towards going through an investigative process or the IVF process, how are you going to manage that process? Now, if you set out just seeing that as a pass or fail exercise, a bit like trying to get through your GCSEs, you, in some ways, you already start with that level of anxiety. Whereas if you see that process as something that is purely that, it's a process. We start out, the clinicians, that they're going to come up with a sort of set of a protocol, something they think will suit based on your hormones, based on maybe a previous experience, and we give it a go. And we learn. All learn from that. It's not a pass or fail. This is about wanting to understand more, wanting to therefore be able to implement that. Now, that's pretty tough to say, if you give us 10 grand, we might be able to give you a bit more information, but we might not. It's not an easy situation. It's challenging. But if you go into it with that sense that there will be learning coming from this cycle,
Yeah.
hopefully there's going to be a baby, and there may even be a couple more embryos in storage, and that would be amazing. But it's, in other words, the amount of time I might spend saying to someone, you've actually done really well. It doesn't feel like that. But to have got to that point,
Yeah.
and to get to blastocyst, and you need to understand that so many parts of that process are going really well. And at the end of the day, I think we do have to remind ourselves, Zita, how inefficient, if you like, the whole reproductive process is. Even a natural,
20% in any month.
30%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And what the rest of the time, why it's not happening, we don't know.
Yeah.
There's a big question mark.
Yeah.
It's just, it squanders a lot of sperm. It squanders a lot of eggs.
Yeah. But I think as well, you know, like I always remember something you were saying to me years ago, like with that fertile window, it doesn't matter. I know as you get older, it's harder, but that window's still the same if you're 40, 41, as if you're in your 30s. So you still, you know, got to give it your best shot, so to speak, don't you?
That window is still there. The chances on a per day basis might be a bit less, but I think this is why we have to get right away from this idea about, you know, looking for sticks, pissing on sticks, and getting that optimum day. We need some healthy sperm. We need every couple of days, if you can, at least 3 times a week, right through the cycle, because cycles, particularly as you get older, some will be short, some will be long. They'll be all over the top. That doesn't matter. What matters, that, you know, the key things that are going to get you pregnant, hopefully, are going to be sex. And actually more sex, and more sex, and more time. It just takes time. Now, obviously, even the number of times that we're doing IVF in clinic because of, if you like, unexplained fertility, and that's as much as anything, the process exists. It might help get more eggs, but really it's about, we're a bit anxious about waiting. You've already tried for a year, 2 years, or whatever, it hasn't worked. We'll try this, but if there's no other reason as to why you're not explaining, the odds are strong that you're then suddenly going to conceive a cycle or so after. That doesn't mean it was necessarily a waste of doing IVF, and it wasn't necessary. We all started to get anxious in case it didn't happen. Did something in the process change? Was it just pure random chance and time? We'll never know.
But, you know, it's interesting as well, because with apps and gadgets and gizmos, yes, they are useful, but I do think they make a lot of women overthink things and panic and overanalyze everything, you know, and I think that's not good. And I know the technology is improving, and I feel that it doesn't give women control over their fertility. And I understand why, because they've been on the pill for 10 years or more. But it's difficult, Jane, isn't it? Because they come in with their phones and analyze every single day of what's going on, what's not going on. And it can be all consuming for you.
Yeah, it can. And I think one of the biggest concerns, I think, is a lot of this kind of app gazing and piss stick gazing and all the rest of it. In some ways it works against you, because the focus is so great. Sex then becomes mechanical. You may as well, quite honestly, hold a shotgun to his head and say, now get some erection, now have sex with me. We've got to get back to that sense of, you know, basically trying to enjoy making love and looking at what was in your relationship before we got to this complete single focus. What did it look like? What was that kept the two of you together? Because that's the bit that's lost. It's
sad as well. It's sad as well, Jane, when when young men come in, you know, in their 30s, 40s, and they have performance anxiety. They can no longer perform, and they think there's something terribly wrong with them. But it's absolute pressure, isn't it?
It is, and I think what women often don't think about, because women, as the passive, as the receptive partner, if you like, often all too quick to sort of say, well, yes, I feel a bit dry, grab a bit of lubricant, you know, okay. But actually, that again, what that's saying is, I'm not particularly aroused because my head's not in the right space or anything else at the moment. Whereas for men, it's exactly the same. His head's not in the right place. erection is basically, it is whatever, the opposite of automatic, but you know what I mean? It's a reflex action. It has to happen. It happens 10 times at night, okay, overnight, such a waste, but it does. But the more you think about this, the more it goes away. So I think we have to try and get, forget about this idea of timing, try and get back to that sort of relaxed state. Now, I know that's hard, and I think anybody that wants to just relax and it'll happen, I'm sure you just want to poke them in the eye and say,
absolutely.
That, So I think we do need to move away from this idea about relaxing and about the mindset being right. And I think, if anything, let's talk about trying to diffuse it, trying to actually find other things to bring back into your life, the things you stop, the things that you no longer see friends, because actually if they say to you, how's life, you think, well, I've done nothing. I've done.
But also, Jane, I think as well, women lose their fertility on every level. They stop being creative if they're in a creative role. They stop having fun. They narrow down their lives, don't they? Which, and during the pandemic, it's even worse because everybody's lives have been narrowed down. But I've got some questions now that I need to ask you. But also, Jane, you don't just sort of do couples counselling, relationship counselling. You do a lot of implication counselling, don't you, for women that are considering egg donation or sperm donation. So can you just explain a little bit about that? And you don't have to be coming to our clinic to access your services, do you?
No, not at all. Not at all. No. The implication counselling is quite specific. It's, if you like, there's more of an agenda to work to. The implications counselling really is for anyone that is going to be used donated sperm, donated eggs, donated embryos, surrogacy. In other words, where there's a third party involved, if you like. And the real emphasis of that is to make sure that you, possibly as the recipient, and maybe as having a known donor as well, understand completely where you stand legally, where the child stands legally in the future, and so on, what the child's rights are, what the donor's rights are, and essentially just how you might manage that in a situation of openness and honesty with a child, to kind of explain how they came about and thinking about the resources that are there to support you in doing that. So that's there is quite an agenda with that, if you like, just to make sure everybody understands. And it often feels quite difficult, and particularly, for example, for single women, it's almost as if you're being questioned about your ability to be a parent. It's not like that. That is not the intention. It is about trying to ensure that you have completely understood where rights will be. The fact that, for example, you would therefore be the only named person on the birth certificate, where the donor's name is nowhere near, and so on. So it's just getting that understanding.
Because I also think it helps a lot of women, and single women as well, because if questions come up they don't even think about, and they're thinking about getting pregnant. They don't think about a lot of the other things that can arise from their decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, so often no one wants to really dare to think too far ahead. You're slightly scared of jinxing it if you start to think about, could I afford to put my child into nursery? You think, oh, I don't want to think about that at the moment because I don't want it to not work. So we start to bargaining. Looks as if you've got some questions.
I've got some questions here for you, Jane. Okay, how to still have hope after years of trying and multiple failed transfer. I have never seen 2 lines. That's really sad, isn't it?
Yeah. That's a tough one. It really is hard. I think, they don't call this the roller coaster for nothing. I think that awful sense of daring to hope and then having your hopes dashed. Again, I think I'd come back to this. Let's not get too caught up on the fact that maybe you can somehow, by programming your mindset to go into it thinking I am in the right place and I'm still hopeful, that is somehow going to influence. Okay, it'll certainly make you feel more comfortable if you go through it believing. Okay, if you go through it, otherwise you wouldn't bother to get out of bed in the morning if you thought, what's the point? So I think you need to have an element of positivity. But it is hard. And I think sometimes what almost needs to happen is, it's about, let's step back, let's think about how far you might go with this whole process. And if you both decided that you would, let's say, for example, use donated eggs, or you would adopt, or whatever, how far does that go? And if that is not going to be happening, then what might life look like if it doesn't,
Yeah.
happen? But then I think once we've accepted that that doesn't have to be the end of the world, it's sometimes easier to go into that rather than with this enormous pressure that it's got to work.
Yeah, it's hard, Jane, isn't it? Because I've been a midwife for 40 years. I'm sure you're very similar. But years
Yeah.
ago, you either had a baby or you didn't have a baby. But now you can go on and on and on and on and on, can't you? So this lady here has just messaged in, about to start my 5th cycle after 10 years of trying. What can I do to stay positive? I've never had a success. Really hard.
It is incredibly difficult. And I can understand that with her question comes that sense of looking around and that sense of things being so unfair. And the number of times people say to me things like, I feel like the green-eyed monster. I've turned into that
Yeah,
green-eyed monster. I
yeah,
hate my friends now. I've cut myself off from them. It is incredibly difficult to approach a 5th cycle and to still maintain that sense of hope. Again, I think with that, I would almost come back to put the dates in your diary of when you need to rock up at clinic. Know when you've got to give yourself injections. In other words, do enough for that process. Don't overdo the angst in terms of what you need to put into it to therefore get more out, and keep yourself distracted. The number of people that would say to me, having decided to take up knitting or jigsaw puzzle making or making huge bits of Lego Technic, I'm sure I knitted myself that last baby. I've just been knitting frantically. It's about taking this energy, this
yes,
nervous energy that goes
yeah,
into it, and trying to direct it into something where you might see some results.
yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Another question here. How do you cope with people around you getting pregnant so easily? That's hard, isn't it?
It's incredibly difficult. I think, first of all, be gentle on yourself.
Yes, I think that's really
It
important.
may be a time when you cannot be the best possible friend. It may be a time, and to someone in particular, it may be a time when you have to just say, acknowledge, I cannot attend this baby shower. Don't force yourself to be doing things that just are a step too far.
Yeah,
So I think have that element of protection for yourself. If you need to drop someone a line and say, look, I am really struggling with it, we will catch up again at some stage, sort of thing. I think it's so hard. I think often at this time when you feel so out of control with everything around you, it is very much like being a teenager again and looking around and seeing who's got the boyfriend, who's got the new
yeah,
trainers, who's got the boobs and so on. It's because what's difficult is your whole peer group, your family, your friend, your siblings, your friends, they're all doing this very one thing. And it's so apparent. It's because you're no longer wanting to go out to nightclubs. That was
yeah,
then, but nor are you that sitting at home with the baby or getting a babysitter in. You're in no man's land.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting as well because I think for so many women, they get so shocked. They might start their period, go to work, bang, somebody tell them they're pregnant. And that doesn't get any easier. It's really, really hard, isn't it?
It'll knock you sideways at any
Yeah,
stage. This is the thing, because this is in some ways we're stuck in grief. This is a loss of
yes,
something we're trying to do.
yeah,
And so at any stage, the anger can surface, all these emotions,
yeah.
at any point.
Another question here, Jane. Me and my partner have grown apart while trying to conceive. What would you do in a counselling session to help?
Again, it comes back to us what we were saying, really, Zita. What did life look like? How did you meet? What did that look like then? What were you both doing? Maybe you were both being successful in your own thing. Maybe you were sporty. Maybe there's things. What things have now changed? Where has this focus now gone? What started to happen or not happen? And again, so often this is that slowly you've stopped seeing friends, you're maybe not exercising the same way, slowly something else has changed, you're not bothering to do something, you're not doing things together. I think it's so important
Yeah.
that you basically bring back, whether it's date night or whatever else, and you do manage to do things together. Maybe they do need some time to actually sit and look at what's going on in the relationship and how they've lost that communication between them,
Yeah.
how that used to happen and suddenly it can no longer happen, often because it ends up in this enormous row or blame game. Blaming because, for example, he wasn't ready 5 years ago,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So it's all this. We need to be able to hear that, acknowledge it, and then look at how we deal with it.
Well, that leads on to my next question. Um, I'm in my early 40s and my partner is 10 years younger than me. He's not ready to have a baby yet, but I know that time will be running out for me. And that is difficult, isn't it?
It is hard. It really is. And I think this is where you come back to logistics of, is this the man that's really right for you longer term? If he's not ready, is there a possibility now but you think he's the man, should we be looking at freezing eggs? Is there any way that we should be preserving fertility? What biologically makes sense? So the social side and the biological side sometimes sadly are right out of line.
Yes.
Do you know?
Yeah.
Finally find the right partner, but you're 42.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
And so on. So it's really hard. So sometimes it has to be, let's try and focus for now on the biology and sort that out and see if there's a way that we can do that. Or have we got to try and bring him up to speed? But sometimes men are lagging behind purely because they don't actually understand the biology. So
Yeah.
there sometimes has to come a level of acceptance that says, if you want to be this woman and she happens to be 10 years older, mate, you're going to have to grow up a bit. You're going to have to grow up fast. Okay.
And women do. I mean, we see women that look amazing for their age. I would never believe that they were 40 or whatever. So
Stunning.
no, it's hard.
Stunning. And it's impossible to believe that the ovaries feel any different. She's beautiful.
Yeah.
Absolutely everything about her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question here, Jane. It's quite an interesting one. I had a termination that I haven't told my husband about. I'm uncertain whether to tell him as we're going to be going for fertility treatment, or will it come out?
Oh,
This has happened a lot to you and me over the years. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the will it come out is obviously that fear of it sort of spilling out in a consultation or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think if it feels so fragile that it really doesn't feel the right time, then maybe that's the time to make sure that the clinic are aware that the partner is unaware of this situation.
Yeah.
I think most of the time it's actually always safer to manage to be straight up honest.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah. And that's what I encourage women to do.
Absolutely. And it may be that you have to say, this is something really hard that I've got to tell you, and I've never been able to tell you because, sometimes women need some support in actually helping to plan that. Sometimes it even needs to happen with an independent person, if you're not sure of his reaction.
Yeah.
But actually, although there might be a little bit of shock, or often it's more about, why didn't you tell me before? This explains a few things. But I think to go through a cycle, an IVF cycle, fearing that scan and images and fearing about what might be said, and of course when in the past and so on, it's not an easy place to go through. And it's always easier to do things when it feels that there's complete clarity and transparency between you.
Because I think for a lot of women, Jane, they worry that they've had that termination and that's the reason they're not getting pregnant now, because maybe it got messed up or they feel guilty, and they're very fearful, aren't they, in terms of their relationship, that it might be the reason that this isn't happening for them.
Yeah, and of course we know that's a million miles from the truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Highly unlikely to cause any problems at all. Even if there's complications, we always check into that, but generally zero problem. Where I think it's that often that sense of women saying, oh, this must be karma. I think it's, and especially, for example, if it's someone that has terminated a pregnancy with the present partner.
Yeah, that's hard. Yeah.
But it was too early in the relationship. So it's easier to justify that it was the wrong time, I was still studying, or the wrong man, or he was abusive. Then you can just about get your head about it. But when it's with that same partner, I think it's almost impossible for women to put their mind back to quite what the pressures were when they made that decision.
Because they regret it bitterly, don't they, many?
Of course.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was absolutely
the right decision to make.
It was
Yeah.
right
No.
for them with all those circumstances. They wanted to do the responsible thing. And there is absolutely no, I think that where it comes from, I think, is because this is quite an emotive subject. It's quite political at times. And it's a difficult one. And sometimes, especially if women haven't been able to share it, for example, with their mum, with their parents, good friend, or even with get the partner's support, and therefore it's become a very, made them feel ashamed of that, rather than something that said, yes, it was a tough time and I really wasn't comfortable. I wish I'd never managed to get myself in that situation, but it happens all the time, do you know? And it's not about, you know, I think it is trying to move on from that, recognizing physically it will not have done any damage.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, this is great, Jane. So finishing off now, when is it best to see a counsellor?
Whenever. I think it's, again, you take to the counselling room whatever you want to spend that hour and explore.
Yeah.
And it could be that there's some other stuff that, for example, a sick parent, how do you handle a specific situation and so on, really doesn't matter. That there is no time. I would honestly say, it might sound strange, but I'd honestly say sooner rather than later. When I talked at the start about you don't have to have hit rock bottom.
Yeah. And that's when people tend to think they need counselling, when they've hit rock bottom. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, sometimes you'd have been better to have tried to step back, look at a situation, look at maybe ways that you're not going to go absolutely to those depths.
Yeah.
Do you know? Maybe find your way, start to find your way out of it before you find yourself curled up in a ball and deciding that you can't really take any more. Do you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, there are 2 free counselling sessions offered, aren't there, for IVF at the clinic and at most clinics.
Most clinics, I think, will give at least 2 free sessions. Some will give more, and others will give, I know, sort of additional ones at discretion and so on.
Yeah.
So I think you don't have to think that that's a bar at all.
Okay, and is counselling available on the NHS? It is, isn't it?
Absolutely,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And things like, so there's various forms of counselling, but sometimes also there's group support, if you like, through things like cognitive behavioural therapy, sometimes online sessions. There's a lot of help available online as well.
Yeah. No. Oh, Jane, this has been really fascinating. Thank you so much. And I hope you'll come back on again and chat. And if anybody wants to see Jane is at the clinic, and it's 0808 196 4060 to make an appointment. And you're doing it all by Zoom now, I would think, Jane, aren't you?
They're all Zoom or Skype. Yes, there's no face-to-face, I'm afraid. Yeah. But it kind of, we've got to the stage, it sort of feels a bit face-to-face now.
Yeah, we're all used to it. Well, thanks so much, Jane. And I hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Thanks. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you all for listening today. I hope that helped you. And I will be back on next Wednesday. And I will be doing acupuncture then. Okay, but thank you so much for listening, and I will post this so it will be on my channel, but also on Zita West Clinic channel. Okay, bye-bye.